David Thompson is the kind of man who controls every outcome. CEO of a billion-dollar tech empire in Chicago, respected, feared, but not known for warmth. That changes in an instant. One morning, he walks into his private office to find two blonde toddlers asleep in his leather chair and a haunting note. Take care of them. They have no one else but you. The boys have his eyes, his jawline, and they call him by name. Who left them? Why now? And what happened to Sarah Collins, the woman he once loved but pushed away? As David unravels the truth, he's pulled into a life he never expected, one filled with crayons, midnight hospital visits, betrayal, redemption. And maybe the family he never thought he deserved. Will he rise to the moment, or run like before? Subscribe now for stories that stir the soul and prove that second chances come when you least expect them. The morning sun sliced through the skyline of Chicago like a blade of gold, warming the glass towers of the West Loop with an illusion of comfort. But inside the penthouse suite atop 1 South Wacker Drive, there was only stillness, until the elevator doors whispered open. David Thompson stepped into the hushed corridor of his executive floor. Impeccably dressed, briefcase in hand, he moved like a man used to power. The door to his corner office, custom-built walnut and steel, was already ajar. Odd. Megan always left it closed until he arrived. He pushed the door open and froze. There, nestled in the deep curve of his Italian leather chair, were two small figures. Toddlers, maybe 3, 4 years old. Both were fast asleep, curled together in a tangle of tiny limbs and blonde hair. One clutched a well-worn stuffed elephant. The other had a crusted tear stain down his cheek. David's heart thudded hard against his ribs. Slowly, he stepped closer. Between them, on a piece of ruled notebook paper, lay a note in rushed handwriting. Take care of them. They have no one else but you. The air thinned. His throat tightened. As if sensing him, one of the boys stirred. Big blue eyes, his eyes, blinked open. The boy looked at him with cautious familiarity and nudged his brother awake. The second boy sat up, rubbed his eyes, and stared. You're David Thompson, the first one whispered, voice hoarse from sleep. Just like Mommy told us. David staggered back a step. Footsteps pounded behind him. Mr. Thompson! Megan burst in, breathless. Security found them downstairs near the revolving doors. They didn't have a guardian with them, just a satchel with some snacks and... that note. She looked toward the boys, then back at David, her voice faltering. They knew your name. David knelt instinctively in front of the chair, his voice low and even. What are your names? I'm Eli, said the one with the elephant. He's Noah. Noah stared solemnly, then said, Mom said if anything ever happened, come here. You're our dad. It hit him like a train. Sarah. The name bloomed in his chest like a fire he hadn't realized still burned. Sarah Collins, kind, brilliant, quiet Sarah, whom he'd dated 5 years ago. Their time together had ended without drama, just drifted apart as his work consumed him. He hadn't heard from her since. He looked at the boys again. Blonde hair, strong cheekbones, and unmistakable glints of his own stubbornness in their small faces. His mind raced, disbelief wrestling with the surreal reality. Where's your mom now? He asked carefully. Eli lowered his gaze. We don't know. She didn't come home for a long time. David swallowed hard. He stood and faced Megan. Say nothing to anyone. Not to the board, not to PR, not even to facilities. Understand? Yes, sir, she said softly. He turned to the boys again. You hungry? They both nodded, quietly. Let's go find you something to eat. As they left the office together, two boys gripping his hands like lifelines, David didn't know where they were headed. But he knew one thing for sure. Whatever Sarah had faced, whatever had driven her to send these boys to his doorstep, It had to be serious. And if they were truly his sons, as every instinct screamed they were, he wasn't going to fail them, not this time. The glass-walled cafe on the 17th floor overlooked the steel bones of Chicago's skyline, but David Thompson wasn't looking at the view. He sat at a marble-topped table across from two small boys, Eli and Noah, who were taking cautious bites of chocolate chip pancakes. A smear of syrup clung to Eli's chin. Noah lined his blueberries into a perfect row, eyes flicking toward David every few seconds as if recalibrating what to think of him. David stirred his black coffee with a trembling spoon, his usual stoic facade cracking in places he couldn't control. These were his sons. He didn't need a DNA test to see it. It was in the shape of their hands, the sharp slope of their noses, and the way Eli squinted when he was thinking. "Do you like pancakes?" Eli asked through a mouthful. David cleared his throat. "Not as much as you two seem to." Noah looked up. "Do you live here? Like, in this whole building?" David hesitated. "I live upstairs, just a few floors above." "Wow," Eli whispered, leaning back to stare up at the towering ceiling. "Mom said you were rich, but I thought she meant like normal rich, not sky rich." David couldn't help the slight laugh that escaped him. It was dry and surprised, even to himself. A pause. "Can you tell me more about your mom?" he asked, carefully watching their expressions. Eli looked at Noah, then back at David. "She got really tired. Like, a lot. Then one day she didn't wake up. She's not dead," Noah said quickly, frowning. "Just sleeping a long time. They said her brain got hurt." David's heart sank like a stone. "Who told you that?" "The lady in the uniform," Eli replied, "at the place with the blinking machines, before they moved us to Miss Renee's house." Foster care. His chest clenched. How had it come to this? How had he missed all of it? He took a breath and he pulled out his phone, typing a name he hadn't said aloud in years. Sarah Collins. The search returned a hospital report buried in the local traffic news. Car accident. 3 months ago. Severe traumatic brain injury. Northwestern Memorial Hospital. A sudden urgency gripped him. He stood. "Boys," he said gently, "I need to make a call. Stay right here with Megan." Megan, who had stayed close but silent, nodded and moved to sit beside them, keeping her voice low and soothing. David stepped into the corridor and immediately dialed the one man he trusted with everything outside business. Wes Langford, his longtime private investigator and, once upon a time, his best friend in law school. "I need you to find out everything about a woman named Sarah Collins," David said, his voice tight. "She might be in a coma. Accident near Aurora. 3 months ago." Wes whistled. "That's not a name I've heard in a while." "I think she's the mother of my sons," David said quietly, silence. "I'm on it," Wes replied finally. "Give me 2 hours." David returned to the table. Eli had taken over his syrup packet and was explaining its physics to Megan, while Noah now had a napkin folded into what looked like a trapezoid spaceship. David slid into the seat with a little less confidence than usual. "Guys," he said, voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of emotion. "I might know where your mom is. I'm going to find out for sure, but until then—" He hesitated. The next words felt impossibly big. "You can stay with me." Eli blinked. "For real?" Noah tilted his head. "Even if we make messes?" David smiled gently. "Especially if you make messes." Megan's eyes glistened, but she looked away. The boys grinned, small, tired smiles, but smiles nonetheless. David reached out and tousled Eli's hair awkwardly, like a man trying to remember how to be something he'd never been. And, just as he did, his phone buzzed. A text from Wes. "Found her, coma, Northwestern Memorial. You're listed as guardian." David read it twice, 3 times. He looked back at the boys. Their mother was alive. Barely, but alive. And somehow, without a plan or permission, David Thompson had just become a father. David's car cut through the heart of Chicago in silence, his hand tightening unconsciously around the wheel every time Eli coughed in the back seat. Noah had fallen asleep against his brother's shoulder, a crayon still gripped loosely in one hand. David caught their reflection in the rearview mirror, 2 boys clinging to each other in a world that made no promises. Northwestern Memorial Hospital loomed into view, sterile and metallic against the bruised gray afternoon sky. David had arranged for a discreet arrival through a private entrance. This wasn't a moment for the public. This was something else, something sacred. Inside, the halls smelled of antiseptic and something more fragile, hope, thinned out by time. "She's on the 11th floor," the nurse at the desk murmured, recognizing his name on the emergency guardian form. "ICU wing, room 1107. David nodded stiffly. "Thank you." The elevator doors slid open with a hush. Eli stood beside him now, holding his hand, his small fingers unsure but determined. Noah clung to the hem of David's coat, wide-eyed and unusually quiet. As they stepped onto the 11th floor, David's heart pounded like a drum. He wasn't used to fear. Deals, deadlines, acquisitions, those he could dominate. But this? Room 1107. He paused outside the door, hand hovering over the handle. "You ready?" he asked softly. Eli gave the smallest nod. Inside, the room was dim, humming with machines that blinked and breathed for her. Sarah lay impossibly still, her auburn hair splayed across the pillow like a memory. Bruising had faded. The scars were healing, but she hadn't moved. The boys darted to her bedside. "Mom," Noah whispered, touching her arm. "We found him. We did it." David's throat constricted. He stood frozen just inside the room, his presence awkward, misplaced, like a man arriving late to a moment that should have never happened without him. "She's cold," Eli said, pulling the hospital blanket up to her chin. "She doesn't like the cold." David stepped closer, carefully. Her face still held the warmth he remembered, soft curves, long lashes, quiet strength. But the stillness. God, the stillness. He lowered himself into the chair beside her bed. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "I swear, Sarah, I didn't know." The boys drew pictures on the small tray table using the crayons Megan had stuffed into David's coat pocket. Flowers, rockets. Eli drew a tall man with glasses standing beside a stick figure woman lying in a bed. Noah's was simpler, a sun over a house, 4 figures under it, holding hands. Every few minutes they would look up and say something to her, as if she might reply. David found himself staring at her hand. He remembered that hand tracing circles on his back while he worked late. He remembered how she used to fall asleep mid-sentence, mumbling about teaching music again, or how Chicago winters were cruel but beautiful. "I'm staying," he whispered, brushing a finger across her knuckles. No movement, but he meant it. That evening, back in the penthouse, David stood in his state-of-the-art kitchen staring at a frozen pizza like it was a Rubik's Cube. "Is the oven broken?" Eli asked innocently. "No," David muttered. "The man is." Noah giggled. "Can I do the timer?" David passed the controls to him without hesitation. He was learning. Clumsily, but learning. That night, after the boys had fallen asleep in the guest bedroom, rechristened the Rocket Room thanks to Eli's pillowcase, David sat alone in the living room, his laptop open on his knees. He was supposed to be reviewing quarterly earnings. Instead, he was searching for pediatric therapists, nutritionists, parenting books, and art supplies. He bookmarked everything, then sat back, staring at the ceiling. There were no quarterly forecasts for fatherhood. His phone buzzed. Wes again. I ran a deeper check, Wes said without preamble. Sarah tried to reach out 2 years ago. An email. It was intercepted by someone on your staff. David closed his eyes. Let me guess. Claudia Hale. Bingo. David's jaw clenched. Claudia had been his gatekeeper for years, efficient, loyal, but clearly strategic. She told Sarah you'd moved on, Wes added, and that you didn't want reminders. The words hit him like bricks. David ended the call and stared out at the city skyline. No more barriers, no more blinders. He had 2 sons asleep under his roof, and a woman down the street who might never wake. But still, he was staying. The next morning, sunlight broke through the floor-to-ceiling windows of David's West Loop penthouse, casting long streaks of gold across the polished concrete floors. The silence that once echoed through the pristine space was now replaced by the sound of 2 small feet racing down the hallway, followed by a second pair not far behind. "Dad!" Noah's voice rang out, stumbling over the word like it was still foreign on his tongue. David looked up from the stovetop where he was warily watching a frying pan filled with half-burnt scrambled eggs. "You're not supposed to call me that unless you're sure," David reminded gently, setting the pan aside and crouching as the boys barreled into him. Noah shrugged. "I'm sure." Eli stood behind, more reserved, twisting the hem of his t-shirt. "We can call you something else if it's weird." David paused. "It's not weird," he said slowly. "Just new." "Then it's perfect," Noah decided confidently, wrapping his arms around David's neck. That word, perfect, landed heavier than David expected. Nothing about this was perfect. Not the mess of forgotten years, not the hospital visits, not the eggs that now resembled rubber, but the hug? That moment? That was perfect in a way spreadsheets never could be. After breakfast, if you could call it that, David took the boys back to the hospital, crayon drawings and new energy in tow. Sarah still hadn't moved, but the boys talked to her anyway. "We brought you a son," Eli said, holding up his yellow paper. "You don't like winter." David stepped outside the room to give them space and answer a call. It was Megan. "You missed the board meeting," she said. "I'm aware. They're nervous. There's a rumor you're stepping down." David glanced back through the small hospital window, watching as Eli leaned over the bed and pressed a kiss to Sarah's forehead. "Maybe I am." Silence. "Sir," Megan said carefully, "the company is your legacy." "No," he said quietly, "it's not." He ended the call before she could respond. That afternoon, David took the boys on a walk through Millennium Park. The wind off the lake bit through his coat, but the boys didn't mind. They darted ahead, laughing and tossing fallen leaves. Watching them, David felt something foreign stir inside. Peace. But it didn't last long. Back at the penthouse, waiting by the concierge desk, was a man in a sleek gray suit. Greg Harper, David's CFO. "David," Greg said smoothly, falling in step beside him as they entered the lobby. "Elevator. I've been trying to reach you." "I know," David said coolly, pressing the button for the penthouse. The elevator doors slid shut. Greg cleared his throat. "There's talk in the media about 2 boys who look like you, showing up at your building, at your office. The board's concerned." David turned to him, steel in his gaze. "The board doesn't run my life." "No, but bad optics tank investor confidence. And if you're distracted—" "Careful, Greg," David warned, voice quiet but razor sharp. "Finish that sentence and you'll be the one distracted, by a legal team." Greg scoffed. "I'm just saying. This sudden dad act? It's not a good look if you're unstable. David stepped closer. Don't mistake love for instability, and don't show up uninvited again. The elevator chimed. David stepped out without looking back. Inside the penthouse, the boys were building a spaceship from cereal boxes. Eli glanced up. Who was that man? No one we need to see again, David said, his tone final. Later that night, long after the boys had fallen asleep, David stood alone in his office overlooking the city. He scrolled through old emails, eventually finding one from 2 years ago, buried in his archive. Subject: Regarding our last conversation, from Sarah Collins. Unread. He opened it with shaking fingers. It was short, quietly written, hopeful. I'm not asking for anything. I just thought you should know. There's a chance you're the father. They're twins, and they're kind. David closed his eyes. Shame washed over him like a cold tide. The city pulsed beneath him, his empire, his tower. But none of it mattered now. He walked into the boys' room. They were curled against each other like two puzzle pieces, chests rising and falling in quiet rhythm. David knelt down, brushing a hand through Eli's tousled hair. I should have known, he whispered. Outside, snow began to fall softly, silently blanketing the city. And, in room 1107, a monitor beeped slightly faster than it had the day before. The next morning arrived with the hush of new snow. David stood in the boys' room before the sun rose, watching Eli and Noah sleep, their cheeks rosy and breath steady beneath fleece blankets. It had only been a few days since their arrival, yet already the penthouse felt different, warmer, lived in, less a monument to ambition and more a home. In the kitchen, David burned the toast again. Third time's not the charm, huh? A groggy voice said from the hallway. Noah shuffled in, dragging a stuffed bear. David chuckled softly. We're getting better. That one only looks mildly inedible. Noah climbed onto a stool. Mom makes oatmeal when it's cold, with cinnamon. David hesitated, then nodded. Let's try that. As the oatmeal simmered and cinnamon filled the air, Eli emerged, rubbing his eyes. Do we visit Mom today? He asked, his voice small. Of course, David said gently. Every day. At the hospital, Sarah remained motionless, but her vitals were stable. The boys chatted with her like always, placing more drawings at her bedside. Today's included a picture of all 4 of them, stick figures smiling in front of a tall building labeled Our New Home. David sat beside Sarah, his fingers brushing hers. They're amazing, Sarah, he whispered. I don't deserve them, or you. He lingered after the boys had stepped out with a nurse for hot cocoa. For a long moment he just watched her, remembering the quiet strength in her eyes, the way she listened more than she spoke, how she used to hum when she worked, always the same soft melody. Suddenly, her hand twitched. David jerked upright, heart thundering. Sarah? He breathed. Nothing. He waited, breath held, but her hand lay still again, as if it never moved. Had it been a dream? He stood, shaken but hopeful. Later that evening, back at the penthouse, David received an unexpected call. It was Wes, his investigator. I found something, Wes said. About Greg Harper. David straightened. I'm listening. There's a shell account. Funds being funneled out through a dummy vendor. Quiet but consistent. My guess, he's been embezzling from the Innovation Fund. David exhaled sharply. How long? Almost 2 years. David ran a hand through his hair. That explains the audit inconsistencies. He's been covering his tracks through internal red tape. Exactly, Wes said. And I think he's trying to set you up as unstable. Leaked whispers to the press about your mysterious twins. David's jaw tightened. Let him whisper. I've got 2 witnesses that call me Dad. He hung up and walked into the boys' room, where Noah was lining up his toy cars with exact precision, and Eli was drawing another family portrait, this one with Sarah in the middle, awake. David sat down next to them quietly. "Did you really draw that just now?" he asked Eli. "Yeah," Eli said shyly. "She's gonna wake up. I feel it." David's throat tightened. "I hope so." Noah looked up. "Are you scared?" David didn't answer right away. Then, softly, "Yes, but not for the same reasons I used to be." "Because of Mom?" Eli asked. David nodded. "And because I don't want to mess this up." Eli put down his crayon and looked him square in the eye. "Just stay." Those two words held more weight than any contract David had signed in his career. "I will," he promised. That night, as the boys slept, David opened a private folder on his laptop. His resignation letter. Clean, clear, final. He read it 3 times, then pressed send. Freedom didn't roar. It settled over him quietly, like the snowfall outside. A decision made not out of fear, but of love. Across town, Greg Harper opened a secure browser window and typed a message into an encrypted chat. "He's stepping down. Time to push the story." But he didn't know what was coming, because while Greg was preparing a scandal, David was building something stronger. A family. And families don't break easy. David had never expected the sound of crayons scratching on paper to become his nightly soundtrack. But in the weeks that followed his resignation, that gentle rhythm, alongside whispered bedtime stories and the occasional squeal of laughter, began softening the steel-lined walls of his West Loop penthouse. The boys had transformed the space without even trying. Where once there was a minimalist white rug, now sat a jigsaw puzzle half complete. The glass coffee table bore fingerprints and juice cup rings. Sarah's old scarf, retrieved from the hospital during one of their visits, now hung near the entry like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. And David? He wasn't the same man either. He wore hoodies instead of tailored suits. He grocery shopped badly and burned things often, but he never burned out. Because every morning, Eli greeted him with a sleepy, "Good morning, Dad," and Noah raced to the kitchen yelling, "Pancake time!" like it was Christmas. Yet, beneath the warmth, tension simmered. Greg Harper was quiet, too quiet, and that silence was louder than any storm. Late one night, Wes Langford showed up at David's door, coat dusted in February snow, a folder tucked under one arm. "You might want to sit down for this," Wes said, voice gravelly. David took the folder and opened it slowly. Inside were photos, screenshots of emails, wire transfers, and most damning of all, a CPS tip form submitted anonymously. "He actually reported me?" David asked, jaw clenched. Wes nodded grimly. "Claimed the twins were unsupervised. Accused you of emotional instability since leaving the company." David shook his head in disbelief. "He wants to provoke an investigation, paint me as unfit, and buy time," Wes added. "I dug deeper. Greg's been siphoning funds into shell companies. But if a CPS report sticks, his board allies might spin it like you left to avoid accountability." David's eyes darkened. "Then it's time we play offense." The next day, David called an emergency meeting with his attorney and a trusted journalist who'd once written a glowing profile of his philanthropic work. He handed her the file Wes compiled. "I'm not doing interviews," he said, "but I am done being silent." That night, as snow blanketed the city, 2 CPS agents arrived unannounced. The knock startled the boys. Eli clutched David's leg while Noah asked, "Did we do something wrong?" "No," David said firmly, "not even close." He invited the agents in, calm but unshakable. The penthouse wasn't spotless. There were Legos in the hallway and peanut butter smudges on the wall, but it was a home. The boys led the agents on a tour themselves, proudly pointing out their bunk beds, their crayon calendar counting the days since their mom's accident, and their framed drawings hanging in David's office. One of the agents, an older woman named Cheryl, smiled warmly. "I've been doing this 27 years, she said, "and you don't fake what those kids just showed us." Before leaving, she paused at the door. This complaint didn't come from a place of concern. It came from someone who wanted to hurt you, but your boys are safe and deeply loved. As the door closed behind her, David exhaled slowly, the weight of weeks lifting off his chest. Later that night, as the boys slept, he sat by Sarah's side in the hospital again. The hum of machines was familiar now. He took her hand and whispered, "They're okay, Sarah. And so am I. I thought I had to be perfect to be a father, but I just needed to show up." As if in response, her fingers twitched again. This time, they didn't stop. "Sarah," he whispered, standing so quickly he knocked the chair back. Her eyelids fluttered. A faint sound escaped her lips. A breath, a murmur, the beginning of something new. David ran to the hall. "Nurse, she's waking up!" Within seconds, the room filled with quiet chaos. Monitors beeped faster. Staff rushed in. But David stood frozen, eyes wide, heart pounding, as he watched Sarah, his Sarah, begin to stir after all these months. Her eyes opened slowly, and when they locked with his, dazed and blinking, he whispered tearfully, "You're home." Sarah's eyes fluttered open to the sterile glow of the hospital room, the slow cadence of beeping monitors marking each tentative breath. David hovered at her side, cradling the boys' drawings that adorned her bedside table, crayon suns, stick figure families, and bouquets of hope. As the twins ran into her field of vision, Eli clutching her hand, Noah grinning shyly, Sarah blinked away tears of confusion and something softer. Relief. "Mom?" Eli whispered, voice trembling so sweetly it nearly cracked David's heart. Sarah managed a small nod, her throat tight but determined. "Yeah, sweetheart," she croaked, her voice rough from disuse yet filled with warmth. "I'm here." David exhaled a breath he didn't know he'd been holding, kissing her hand reverently. The boys crowded around her bed, their youthful energy bright against the hospital's muted pastels. "We missed you," Noah blurted out, voice cracking with sincerity. Sarah's eyes misted as she pulled them close, wrapping her arms around both boys in a gentle embrace. David watched, heart pounding, as the three connected in a tender embrace that washed away months of guilt and fear. In the days that followed, Sarah's recovery remained painstakingly slow. Each morning, David arrived with mugs of lukewarm coffee and anticipated lists, physical therapy schedules, medication times, and the boys' classroom updates. By afternoon, he transformed into storyteller-in-chief, recounting every small victory, their new tandem bike, Eli's first soccer goal, Noah's thrilling discovery of what happens when you stack 14 toy cars end to end. Sarah's hand would drift to the small stack of drawings, each one a testament to her son's unwavering belief in her. "They're my favorites," she whispered once, voice thick with emotion as she traced a crayon circle around her own stick figure face. "Mine too," David replied gently. He brushed a stray hair from her forehead, the gesture both intimate and achingly familiar. "They're kind of magical, you know." Later, when the sun dipped below Chicago's skyline, Sarah's room would grow quiet. David would pull up a chair, the twins dozing in their makeshift cots, and he would talk about business, about regrets, about the sharp edges of his own past. Sarah listened avidly, her eyes reflecting both pain and hope. "You've changed," she said softly one evening, the hum of the ventilator punctuating her words. "You're here, really here." David's gaze faltered. "I'm trying," he murmured honestly, brushing his fingers across her hand. These boys needed a father, more than I ever knew. You're giving them everything, Sarah replied, voice thick. A tear rolled down her cheek and David stooped to kiss it away. Thank you for not walking away. But recovery was rarely linear. There were days when Sarah's strength wavered, when her limbs felt leaden and her mind foggy. On those mornings, Eli would lean in, patting her arm with childlike concern, while Noah offered a precarious stack of soft toys like a peace offering. "Feel better, Mommy?" Eli would ask, voice quivering. Sarah would force a smile, every fiber of her being grateful for these tiny anchors. "I will," she'd promise, blinking back tears. Meanwhile, David faced his own storm. Greg Harper's betrayal still echoed in boardroom murmurs, and the winter chill seeped into his penthouse, reminding him of empty rooms and colder nights before the boys arrived. Now, though, the penthouse was alive, scattered puzzle pieces, mismatched socks drying on the radiator, chocolate smudges on the counter. He found solace in these domestic disasters, in the chaos that meant life and love. One afternoon, when Sarah was too fatigued for visitors, David helped the twins deliver hot cocoa to the night shift nurses, smooth with extra marshmallows, just as Eli insisted. The nurses chuckled at the boys' earnest delivery, and Sarah's name printed on the cups in shaky script. "Anything for sweet Mrs. Collins," Noah declared proudly. Sarah's recovering smile reached her eyes when David later recounted their triumph. In the quiet hours before dawn, David often found himself by Sarah's side, watching her sleep. He'd whisper promises. "I'll be a better man. I'll be the father they deserve." And sometimes, in the stillness, her hand would squeeze his in agreement, a silent vow binding them to an uncertain future. Light grew stronger in her eyes each day. The tentative spark of recognition bloomed into affectionate glances, shared jokes with David, and whispered plans for tomorrow. "I want to see them grow up," Sarah said one morning, voice firmer than he'd heard in months. "With us." David's throat tightened with gratitude. He pressed his forehead to hers, feeling the steady pulse of her heart. "Always," he vowed. Outside the window, winter's grip began to loosen. Chicago's streets shimmered with slush and promise, the world readying for spring. In Sarah's room, a different kind of thaw took place, hearts unfreezing, wounds knitting, and a fragile family daring to believe in second chances. And, as the sun rose higher, illuminating the 3 crayon-drawn suns taped above Sarah's bed, David knew that every struggle, every tear, and every fearful night had led him to this moment, a new beginning born from the resilience of those he loved most. David woke to the echoes of tiny footsteps padding across his sleek hardwood floors, an oddly comforting sound after so many lonely mornings. He swung his legs out of bed, careful not to tangle in the crisp white sheets of his West Loop penthouse, and padded down the corridor. In the living room, Eli and Noah stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, their little hands pressed against the glass as they watched the city awaken. "Dad?" Eli called softly, his blue eyes alight with excitement. "Breakfast!" For a moment, David simply stood there, heart swelling. The words sounded strange on his tongue, like a promise he was only just beginning to understand. He ruffled Noah's damp hair before calling back, "Be right there." As he shuffled into the open-plan kitchen, he swallowed a laugh at the sight. Flour dusted every surface, a tipped-over carton of eggs smeared across the counter, and a half-burnt slice of toast reposed in the toaster's slot like a charred relic. Megan's voice, calming yet firm, drifted from his phone's screen at the kitchen island. "You're cleared through the rest of the month, David. Child services signed off. I've notified the board you're on parental leave." He nodded at the screen, though she couldn't see him. "Thank you," he said quietly, voice thick. "I need this." Megan's smile flickered across the video feed, and she gave him a thumbs up before vanishing from view. He took a deep breath, grounding himself in the small domestic scene before him, and reached for a spatula. The boys surged forward, eager for their morning ritual. "Toast!" Noah announced proudly, brandishing the single slightly singed slice triumphantly. They giggled as David carefully buttered it, on the wrong side, but they cheered anyway. "Sophistication will have to wait," he teased gently. Eli handed him 2 mismatched mugs, one green, one orange, filled with lukewarm milk. "You like cocoa?" Eli reminded him earnestly. David winked. "I do. You remembered." He lifted the cocoa in a mock toast. "To new beginnings." The boys clinked their mugs against his, spilling a little foam over the rim. David chuckled, wiping it away tenderly. After breakfast, he gathered the boys at the foot of the grand staircase, the one he was still nervous about with toddlers. He knelt, lacing Eli's tiny sneakers with fumbling fingers. "You tie them?" Eli asked, fascinated. David tightened the laces and handed Eli a triumphant thumbs up. "All you," he encouraged. Next, he bent over to tie Noah's shoes, who hopped impatiently on one foot. "Patience," David coached softly, threading the laces methodically. When he finally stood, both boys held out their little shoes proudly. "Good job, Dad," they chorused, and he realized how precious that title had become. By late morning, the penthouse echoed with the rumble of toy cars and the pattering of tiny feet as David tried, and spectacularly failed, to assemble a simple wooden train track. He sat cross-legged on the marble floor, instruction manual sprawled beside him, while Eli supervised with gravity. "Turn that track here," Eli instructed, pointing. Noah lined up colorful blocks in perfect rows. "Here," he said, placing the last block with impressive precision. David's frustration gave way to awe. He ruffled their hair. "You two are better engineers than I am." The doorbell chimed. His first planned visitor since the boys arrived. He waved them back. "Stay here, okay? I'll be right back." At the door stood Wes Langford, private investigator turned confidant, a weathered man with kind eyes and a leather satchel slung over his shoulder. "Thought I'd check in," Wes said warmly as David ushered him inside. The twins peeked from behind the couch, curiosity bright. "Everything okay?" David asked, shutting the door behind Wes. He felt guilty for momentarily stepping away from their world. "Better than okay," Wes replied quietly. "Greg Harper's still bruised about you stepping down. Sent me a veiled threat. Says he'll contest guardianship if he needs to. But CPS saw what they needed. You're solid." He placed the satchel on the coffee table, flipping it open to reveal neatly organized files. Medical reports, legal documents, and a single photo of Sarah, frail but smiling. "And I pulled new intel. She's started to respond to stimuli, even squeezing your finger." David's chest tightened. He nodded gratefully. "Thanks, Wes." His gaze drifted back to Eli and Noah, who were now both building a towering block fortress. Without thinking, David crossed the room and crouched beside them. "What are we building?" he asked gently. Eli grinned. "A castle. For our family." Noah slid over a final block. "With a room for Mommy." They both looked up at him, eyes shining. David swallowed hard, emotion flooding him. "I love it," he whispered. He took a block from them and placed it on top, sealing their creation. Wes cleared his throat, giving David a moment to compose himself. "I'll keep an eye on Harper," he said. "But right now, this," he gestured broadly to the laughter, the warmth, the scattered toys, "is what matters." David nodded, feeling more certain than ever that home was here, in this noisy, messy, beautiful space. As Wes departed, David lifted the twins into his arms, spinning them gently in a triumphant circle. "This is what I've been missing," he said breathlessly, planting sweet kisses on their foreheads. "And I'm not letting go." The boys giggled uproariously, their joy a balm to his soul. Later, as the afternoon light softened through the glass walls, Sarah's soft voice crackled over the video monitor. "David!" Both boys ran to the bedside, shouting, "Mommy!" David knelt beside them, pressing the call button. On the screen, Sarah's eyes glistened with recognition as she reached out a frail hand. Eli and Noah shouted, "Hi, Mom!" And Sarah managed a trembling smile. David closed his eyes, a single tear falling as he whispered under his breath, "We're here. We're all right." And in that moment, amid burnt toast, scattered toys, and whispering monitors, David Thompson fully realized that the life he had carefully built for himself was nothing compared to this one he was learning to cherish, every imperfect, wondrous second of it. David woke early to the soft patter of Noah's little sneakers on the marble floor. At 6:30 a.m., sunlight filtered through the enormous windows of his West Loop penthouse, illuminating a scene he never would have imagined 12 weeks ago. There, on the plush rug, Eli sat cross-legged, frowning solemnly at a banana peel discarded beside him. Noah knelt beside a line of the miniature cars, meticulously adjusting their positions until each one sat perfectly bumper to bumper. "I can't stand bananas," Eli announced crisply, pushing the discarded fruit aside. "They're mushy." David paused in the doorway, heart swelling at their unabashed honesty. "Okay," he said softly, easing down onto the rug between them. "What about pancakes?" Eli brightened instantly. "Yes, pancakes." Noah, who rarely spoke before his big brother finished, nodded vigorously, his toy fire truck honking. David stood and headed to the kitchen, calling back, "Pancakes it is!" As he whisked batter in a bowl, he reflected, with a mixture of astonishment and delight, on how well he was beginning to know these boys. They were carving their own personalities into his life. Eli, the frank, no-nonsense foodie; Noah, the gentle architect of order. By 7 o'clock, the sweet scent of sizzling pancakes filled the penthouse. David plated them, fluffy, golden discs, arranged in a smiley face pattern for Eli and a perfect stack for Noah. He watched them dig in, syrup dripping delightfully down their chins. "Dad," Eli said between bites, "these are the best pancakes ever." David felt something catch in his throat. The word "Dad" felt like both a question and a promise. "Thanks, buddy," he managed, smiling warmly. After breakfast, the boys insisted on performing their daily ritual: walk to the hospital to visit Sarah. Though the drive to Northwestern Memorial Hospital only took 20 minutes, David treated it as a solemn procession. He buckled them into the back seat facing each other, Eli grasping David's phone case with his small fists. "We forgot our drawings," Eli reminded him seriously. "We need to give them to Mommy." At Sarah's bedside, the boys presented their artwork, crayon sketches of their small family, complete with a glowing sun overhead and hearts spelling out "I Mom." David placed the pages gently on the bedside table, fighting back a surge of emotion. "She'll love these," he whispered, brushing Eli's hair aside so the boy could touch Sarah's hand. Noah, more reserved, laid his toy fire truck next to the drawings. "She likes trucks," he said quietly. Sarah's hand twitched ever so slightly, and David's heart lurched. He stepped close, cupping her hand between both of his. "It's me, Sarah," he said tenderly. "It's David." The boys clustered around the bed, peering at her pale form with concern. "Mommy?" Eli asked anxiously. David cleared his throat, his voice gentle but unwavering. "She's still sleeping, champ, but she can feel you." Eli nodded solemnly, wrapping Sarah's fingers in his own. Noah stroked a lock of hair from her forehead. "We love you, Mom," he murmured. Leaving the hospital, David buckled the boys in for the ride home. "They should let us ride the elevator together," Noah complained softly. Eli punched his brother lightly on the shoulder. "Stop complaining," Eli chided, though his lips quivered. David reached back to pat Eli's knee. "Hey," he said quietly, "you know you two are braver than anyone I know." That evening, as the city lights flickered on, David sat at his desk poring over toddler socks and school registration forms while Eli and Noah unwound in the living room. The penthouse, once so sterile, now carried the hum of life. Toy blocks littered the floor, a half-torn bedtime story lay open, and the scent of lingering pancakes drifted faintly down the halls. Megan's earlier voicemail replayed in his mind. The board fully supported his leave, and Greg Harper's sabotage had collapsed spectacularly once CPS saw how lovingly David cared for the boys. He leaned back, eyes drifting to the photo Sarah's sister had sent. 3 walking toddlers, arms entwined. But the hustle of Washington Boulevard faded when he heard the boys' soft voices by the window. He found them gazing out at the city's glittering skyline, exclaiming over passing cars and fireflies that somehow flickered against the street lamp glow. "Look, Dad!" Noah shouted, pointing. The 2 boys high-fived, then turned to him expectantly. David knelt beside them. "Ready for bedtime?" he asked gently. They both nodded earnestly, Eli flicking his hair back. "We draw a picture tonight," Eli reminded him. Noah hugged his stuffed monkey. "For Mommy." Later, in the boys' room, once David's minimalist office, sheets of paper covered the floor alongside jars of crayons. David sat cross-legged, helping Eli outline Sarah's face according to the boys' exacting directions. "Her hair is long, Dad," Eli said, coloring carefully. Noah scribbled hearts around the page, humming softly. "Daddy, help me?" he asked, reaching for David's hand. Together, they drew trucks and hearts and stick-figure families. When the boys were finally tucked into bed, David stood in the doorway, quiet tears glimmering in his eyes. He whispered, "Good night, my sons," and watched as they drifted peacefully to sleep. Closing the door, he exhaled deeply, heart full. Alone in the quiet penthouse, David returned to the living room couch, now scattered with artwork and baby blankets. He pressed a crayon-smudged drawing to his chest, feeling the raw truth of the past months. Discovery, guilt, joy, and the hard work of love. Tomorrow, he would face new challenges, legal battles, boardroom reprisals, and Sarah's uncertain recovery. But tonight, he simply allowed himself to feel grateful. He gazed at the city beyond, resolute. "I'm here. I'm staying." And, as the lights winked out one by one, the penthouse glowed softly with the promise of family. David stared at the soft glow of the hospital monitor beside Sarah's bed long after the late-night shift ended. The rhythmic beep marked each breath she took, steady yet fragile, much like his own guarded heart. He'd rushed home from the shelter dinner, promising Eli and Noah he'd return for bedtime stories. But Sarah's slight finger twitch earlier had rewritten every priority. Now, in the quiet hush of the private room at Northwestern Memorial, David braced himself, fingers interlaced, as if cradling his own confession. Soft footsteps echoed outside, and Megan's worried face appeared in the doorway. "You've logged 70 hours this week," she whispered anxiously. "You need rest." David offered a grateful nod but shook his head resolutely. "Not tonight." He smiled wryly, the curve unfamiliar on his tense face. "I need to be here. She might wake up." Megan lingered, eyes sympathetic before slipping away. He'd once prided himself on being indispensable at board meetings. Now he measured indispensability by bedside vigil. He reached out, brushing Sarah's hair back tenderly. Memories flashed. The first time he'd held her hand in a rainy Lincoln Park gazebo, the hush between them charged with unspoken dreams. Fear surged. He'd avoided fatherhood out of cowardice, afraid he would mimic the absentee example of his own father. Now, with 2 sons relying on him and Sarah fighting for life, his fear felt laughably small and yet crushingly immense. A wheeze stirred Sarah's chest, and the ventilator coughed twice. David's breath caught painfully. He leaned closer, voice trembling. "I never wanted to be this man," he confessed quietly, recalling the sleek boardroom persona, the polished presentations that masked his emotional distance. "I thought ambition was everything. I thought I couldn't afford distractions." He swallowed hard, eyes glistening. "I was wrong. Everything else, every deal, every accolade, means nothing if I'm not here for you and them." He traced the curve of her cheek with fingertips warmed by guilt and hope. I'm here now, he repeated, voice steadier. I promise, I won't walk away. Behind him, the door opened softly, and Eli tiptoed in, Noah close behind. They paused, eyes wide, sensing the gravity in their father's posture. Noah clutched his teddy bear protectively. "Daddy?" Eli's voice was small, urgent. David turned, heart swelling at their innocent concern. He crouched, arms open. "Hey, Bud, it's okay. We're all right." Noah shuffled forward, pressing his little hand against Sarah's. "Mommy's tired," he said, voice quivering with empathy beyond his years. David's throat constricted. Eli nodded solemnly, echoing the unspoken bond that had formed over hospital visits and whispered bedtime prayers. "We're here," Eli declared bravely. "We love you." Sarah's breathing steadied, and for a moment the machine's beeps seemed more hopeful. Guilt and gratitude mingled in David's chest as he tucked the boys beside him. He wrapped his arms around them, feeling their rapid heartbeats against his rib cage, the living proof of Sarah's sacrifice. "You guys are my strength," he whispered. "Thank you for teaching me what really matters." Eli snuggled closer. "We need you, Dad," he said simply. David closed his eyes, tears dampening his collar. Outside, the standard hospital fluorescent lights hummed, but in that intimate circle, time slowed to a gentler rhythm, one of shared fear, shared love, shared resolve. David realized that true leadership meant vulnerability, admitting he was afraid, yet standing firm anyway. He stood slowly, lifting the boys gently. "Let's get home," he said, voice husky but tender, "and read the story I promised." As they filed out, David paused at the foot of the bed, glancing at Sarah's still form. "Rest up," he murmured, brushing her hand once more. "We'll need you." That night, back in the penthouse, the willowy city lights barely pierced the drawn curtains. David read Goodnight Moon to Eli and Noah, voices soft but confident. The boys yawned, eyelids drooping as their father tucked them into their makeshift bunk beds and switched on the nightlight. In the glow, their faces reflected hope newly kindled. Alone again on the couch, David cradled a mug of untouched coffee, heart alight with purpose. He'd shared his deepest fear, becoming an absent father, and instead discovered a strength he never knew he possessed. The road ahead was uncertain. Sarah's recovery, legal hurdles, boardroom speculation. Yet, for the first time, David embraced uncertainty with quiet determination. He wasn't the man he'd been. He was something new. A father present, a partner steadfast, a man redeemed by love. He leaned back, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Tomorrow," he whispered to the silent apartment, "we fight together." And as the city exhaled in the distance, David felt a fierce calm settle within him. No longer defined by fear, he was defined by the family he protected and cherished. David's hand trembled as he signed the final resignation papers, his heart pounding with uncharacteristic adrenaline. The lavish corner office of Thompson Innovations suddenly felt like a gilded cage, its floor-to-ceiling windows a barrier between him and the life that truly mattered. Just hours ago, he'd announced his departure as CEO, shocking shareholders and employees alike. Now, he stood in the hushed hush of the executive suite, waiting for Greg Harper, his CFO, to arrive. Greg swept in, perfectly tailored suit crisp against his shoulders, his expression schooled into faux concern. "David," he began coolly, "I've been fielding calls from Child Protective Services. They've opened an investigation into your guardianship." His voice was silky, venomous. "Somebody claimed you're neglecting your sons." David's stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, each word clipped with controlled fury. "I've been with them every day. Read the logs, check my phone records." Greg smirked. "You can't deny the CPS report, can you? They visited your penthouse this morning, saw empty rooms, no toys, no children's furniture. They said it looked Unfit. He let the accusation hang in the air like a guillotine. Unfit, David echoed incredulously. He'd painstakingly filled his glass and steel loft with crayon drawings, toy cars lined on shelves, and a makeshift bunk bed for Eli and Noah. Yet the CPS official had come at 7:30 a.m., before the boys left for school. It was a convenient snapshot, a frame deliberately chosen to paint him a negligent father. Rage flared in David's chest, but he kept his voice low. "Who made that call?" he demanded. "Who lied to CPS?" Greg's linen handkerchief twitched in his breast pocket. "I don't know. Anyone could have. You have rich enemies, David, people who'd profit by your downfall." He closed the distance, lowering his voice. "Be careful. You're vulnerable now." David's eyes burned. He'd felt Greg's hostility for weeks. Subtle misdirections in board meetings, thinly veiled critiques of his leadership leave, the spread of whispers about his neglect. Now it clicked. Greg had orchestrated this smear to seize control while David was distracted by family emergencies. "You set me up," David said quietly, but ominously. "You brought CPS here." Greg blinked, a flash of panic betraying him for the first time. "David, this is insane. Don't lie," David snapped, stepping forward until their collars almost touched. "CPS was here at 7:30. The official took notes about missing children's items. You're the only one with access to their files." He seized Greg's arm, his stare unflinching. "Why did you do this?" Greg swallowed hard, face paling. I thought you'd never resign. When you did, I panicked. I thought if you were out of power, the board would forget this fiasco and rally behind me." David released him, every muscle trembling. "You tried to destroy my standing as a father to topple me." The accusation echoed in the empty office. Then David turned, pulling out his phone. With calm precision, he dialed Megan, his assistant. In one breath, he laid out the facts. CPS visit, Greg's access, his confession. Megan listened, her tone sharp with sympathy, before telling him she'd arrange a meeting with the CPS investigator immediately. Within the hour, CPS official Marlene Diaz, a stern woman with empathetic gray eyes, arrived at Thompson Innovations. David accompanied her to an empty conference room where he displayed photographs of his penthouse, bunk beds laden with blankets, toy chests stuffed with cars, a drawing wall plastered with the boys' art. He showed her signed attendance rosters at Little League, school parent-teacher emails, hospital visitation logs. Each proof was meticulously organized, stamped with authenticity. Marlene's expression softened as she scrolled through the evidence. "Mr. Thompson, it appears this was a malicious complaint." She looked up. "Your sons are clearly well cared for." She slid a formal notice across the table. "The investigation is closed." Relief crashed through David like a tidal wave. He exhaled shakily, clenching his fists. He dared a glance at Greg, who stood at the door, guilt etched in every line of his face. "Greg," David called, voice cold. "Join us." The CFO approached, shoulders hunched. Marlene met Greg's gaze directly. "Did you file this complaint?" she asked gently. Greg's bravado shattered. He nodded, voice cracking. I thought I could save the company. I was jealous, afraid he'd be gone forever." Marlene's disapproval was palpable. "False reporting of child neglect is a felony. Consider this your warning." David stepped forward, fury and disappointment tangled in his stare. "You betrayed me," he said quietly, "and you risked my son's well-being for your greed." Turning to Megan, he said, "Don't let him close to the accounts or files again." After the CPS official departed, David confronted Greg one last time in the hushed hallway. Greg's eyes were downcast. "I'm sorry," he managed. "Your apology won't fix this," David replied. "I'm forcing you to resign. You'll hand over every financial record to the board and the authorities. Then I want no part of you in my life." Greg nodded miserably. understanding that he'd lit the fuse of his own undoing. As David watched Greg walk away, he felt an unexpected catharsis. He'd defended not only his position as guardian of the company, but, more importantly, his role as guardian of his sons. The ringing of David's phone jolted him back to present. It was Sarah's bedside monitor. The twins' bedtime stories awaited him. He straightened his tie, no longer a CEO's armor, but a reminder of his promise to his family, and strode toward the elevators, a renewed determination blazing in his chest. Tomorrow, he would champion his boys in boardrooms and bedtime alike. For now, he was their father, protector, and unwavering champion, and nothing, not even betrayal from within, could change that. David's heart thundered in his chest as he navigated the subdued corridors of Northwestern Memorial Hospital, Eli clinging to his hand and Noah clutching his jacket. The antiseptic smell was stronger tonight, each echo of their footsteps magnified in the empty hallway. It was past visiting hours, but Dr. Patel, Sarah's attending neurologist, had given them special permission, face grave as he ushered them into room 712. Inside, Sarah lay motionless beneath pale sheets, monitors beeping rhythmically beside her. Photographs of the boys decorated a small table, a crayon portrait of 3 stick figures labeled Mom, Dad, Us, and a blurred ultrasound image that had haunted David's guilt-ridden dreams. The room felt suspended in time, the soft glow of a single lamp casting long shadows. Eli stepped forward, eyes brimming with uncertain hope. "Mommy?" he murmured, voice tentative. Noah reached out, his small fingers grazing Sarah's hand. For a moment, nothing happened. Then gradually, Sarah's long frozen fingers curled around Noah's. The boys gasped in unison. David, who'd watched so many patients awaken in documentaries, swallowed hard. Real life felt infinitely more fragile. "Dad?" Sarah's voice, raw and disoriented, fluttered from her lips. It wasn't a full sentence, but it was enough. David dropped to one knee beside her bed, tears pooling in his eyes. "Yes, love. It's me." His voice cracked, choked with relief and remorse. Sarah's eyelids fluttered. Her gaze drifted to the drawings on the table. "They're ours?" she whispered, eyes widening as she struggled to recall. Eli nodded eagerly. "We're your boys, Mommy. You told us to find Dad." The words tumbled out with childlike certainty. Overwhelmed, Sarah turned her head to David, confusion and recognition warring in her expression. "You stayed?" she asked softly, voice trembling. David took her hand, both of her hands, and pressed them gently to his lips. "I promised." Dr. Patel entered quietly, pausing at the door. "Mrs. Collins, welcome back," he said gently. "You've been in a coma for 3 months. We're monitoring you closely, but so far, so good." His clinical tone couldn't mask a flicker of warmth as he studied the family scene, 3 children leaning in, a husband's unwavering gaze. Sarah's gaze shifted back to her sons. I dreamed about you," she said, voice weak but steady. "I tried to wake up." Eli leaned forward, his small chest rising and falling as tears of joy welled in his eyes. "We never left your side." Noah sniffed, voice cracking. "We told Daddy to help you." David caught Sarah's gaze, pain and love intermingling in that silent exchange. "I burned dinner 3 times, he admitted sheepishly, earning a weak smile from her, "but I'd do it 1,000 times if it meant having you back." Sarah's eyes softened as she studied them. "You've been a good father," she said haltingly, brushing a stray lock of hair from Eli's forehead. "I'm so proud of you." The words, fragile as her condition, struck David like sunlight after a storm. He swallowed hard. "You saved me," he whispered fervently. "Our boys saved me." The beeping monitors seemed to nod in agreement as Sarah closed her eyes, exhaustion overtaking her. Eli and Noah settled onto chairs beside her bed, leaning in to offer gentle embraces. David stood and reached for the nurse's call button. "Can we stay until she rests?" he asked. The nurse, one of the many kind faces who'd cared for Sarah, smiled compassionately. "Of course." As Dr. Patel stepped aside to chart notes, David sank onto the edge of the bed, pulling Sarah's hand to his chest. "You fought so hard," he murmured, voice thick, "and we fought for you." Sarah's fingers tightened, acknowledging the promise unspoken but deeply felt. That night, as monitors tracked her steady recovery, David watched his family surround Sarah. Two small boys offering stuffed animals, a wife newly awakened to the life he'd risked losing. He realized that power, wealth, and success paled beside this fragile miracle. Outside, Chicago's skyline glittered against the dark sky, a city of second chances. And within that hospital room, a family, broken, mended, reborn, breathed together in hopeful unison. David knew the road ahead would still hold uncertainty, but as he gazed at his sleeping wife and their sons, he understood one immutable truth. Some awakenings were worth every sacrifice. Every morning, as gentle sunlight filtered through the hospital blinds, David slipped quietly into Sarah's room, where the rhythmic hum of monitors had become a reassuring soundtrack. Today, Sarah stirred more easily than yesterday, her eyelids fluttering open to reveal that familiar warmth in her eyes, a warmth that reminded David of every sunrise he'd missed before her accident. Eli and Noah waited eagerly on either side of her bed, holding out hand-drawn cards decorated with scribbled hearts and two stick-figure dads. "Good morning, Mom," Eli whispered huskily, his voice thick with pride. Noah offered a shaky grin. "We saved your hand from getting cold." Sarah's lips quirked into a soft smile as she accepted their offerings, her fingers brushing against their artwork. David sat on the edge of the bed, his heart swelling with emotion. He placed a hand gently on Sarah's shoulder. "They've been my greatest teachers," he confessed quietly, as if speaking too loudly might awaken old fears. "I've learned more about love from them in these past few weeks than I ever did in all my boardrooms combined." Sarah's gaze shifted to the twins. "They grew up so fast," she murmured, voice tenderly awed. "I missed so much." Regret flickered across her face, but David squeezed her hand reassuringly. "You're here now," he said fervently. "They need you. I need you." Over the next hour, Rebecca, the boys' favorite nurse, arrived with breakfast trays balanced carefully in her arms. She paused at the doorway, taking in the tableau, a mother awakening, her children beaming, and a husband whose entire world had realigned around this bedside. "Morning, everyone," she said cheerfully. "Breakfast for champions." As Rebecca laid out toast, scrambled eggs, and fruit, Eli and Noah peppered her with questions about her weekend plans and whether she'd read their latest comic book recommendations. Rebecca laughed indulgently, her eyes shining with fondness. "I'll add those to my reading list," she promised, "but only if Dad here helps me with crossword puzzles later." David pretended to groan, making the boys giggle. "Deal," he agreed, settling into a nearby chair. The room felt alive in a way it never had when Sarah lay unresponsive, filled with laughter, the soft rustle of pages, and the gentle clink of cutlery. Later that afternoon, Dr. Patel arrived for his rounds. He watched Sarah interact with her family, eyebrows lifting in pleased surprise. "Your progress is remarkable," he told her warmly. "Most patients take weeks longer to reach this level of engagement." Sarah blushed slightly, her cheeks still pale but glowing with determination. "I wish I could tell you how much it means to have my boys here," she said earnestly. "And David, I owe you more than I can ever say." David stood beside her, voice husky. "We owe each other," he replied. "I walked away from you once. I won't make that mistake again." As Dr. Patel checked her vitals, Sarah glanced over at the boys who were busy comparing who had more stickers on their hospital charts. "Mom, when can we go home?" Noah asked hopefully, voice trembling with anticipation. Sarah exchanged a look with David. "We'll talk to the doctor tomorrow," she answered gently. "But soon." Relief washed over Eli's face and he threw his arms around Sarah's waist. "Yes!" he exclaimed. Noah joined in and Sarah laughed, a clear, joyous sound that made David's throat tighten with gratitude. That evening, after the hospital lights dimmed and the bustling corridors grew quiet, David gathered the kids in a circle. He produced a battered storybook, its cover creased from years of use. "Who wants a chapter before bedtime?" he asked, voice softly playful. "Me! Me!" the boys chorused, scrambling onto the beds. Sarah watched from her pillow, eyes brimming with tears and pride. As David began to read, his voice tentative at first, then more confidently as he fell into the rhythm, Sarah drifted into peaceful reflection. The steady cadence of his reading, punctuated by the boys' eager questions, felt like a balm to her weary soul. After the story, David leaned over and kissed Sarah's forehead. "Thank you for coming back to us," he whispered, "for fighting so hard." Sarah took his hand, pressing it against her heart. "Our family is everything," she murmured. "I'll keep fighting for every moment with you and the boys." David nodded, eyes shining. "Together," he agreed firmly. "Always." Down the hall, Rebecca noticed the family's soft glow from beneath Sarah's door. She caught David's eye and offered him a knowing smile, a silent acknowledgement that this once-fractured family was healing, one breath, one laugh, one tender moment at a time. And, for the first time in years, David felt at peace, certain that the trials they'd endured would give way to a future stronger than any challenge they'd ever faced. Snow drifted lazily outside the large bay windows of David's West Loop penthouse, blanketing the city in a quiet, glistening stillness. Inside, laughter echoed, gentle, chaotic, alive. Toys were scattered across the hardwood floor, a crayon mural now stretched across the stainless steel refrigerator, and the once pristine sectional was piled high with blankets and stuffed animals. Sarah stood in the kitchen, pouring hot cocoa into 4 mismatched mugs, humming softly. Her movements were slower now, but her smile, genuine, enduring, spoke of resilience. Her recovery had taken months, each day a fragile step forward. But today she moved with more ease, strength gradually returning to limbs once stilled by coma. David appeared behind her, pressing a hand gently to her back. "You sure you're up for the park?" he asked, voice warm with concern. Sarah turned, her eyes reflecting both tenderness and determination. "They've been waiting all week, and you promised snow angels." He chuckled, glancing toward the living room where Eli and Noah were struggling to zip up their puffy coats over thick sweaters. "I did, and you know they'll hold me to it." Moments later, the family stepped out into Lincoln Park, the boys racing ahead with squeals of delight. David trailed close behind, carrying the thermos of cocoa and a plaid blanket tucked under one arm. Sarah's arm looped through his, steadying them both. The crisp air bit at their cheeks, but it carried a clarity that felt refreshing, like something old being made new again. The boys dropped into the snow, immediately crafting crooked angels, their arms flapping wildly. David knelt beside them, helping shape wings and fix uneven halos. Sarah laughed from the bench, watching the man she once thought she'd lost completely now kneeling in the snow, arms wide, face bright with boyish joy. "Dad," Noah called out, "can we build a snow fort next?" "Only if I'm king of it," David teased. "You can be the dragon," Eli offered seriously, "because you snore like one." David fell back into the snow with exaggerated offense, groaning dramatically as the boys pounced. Sarah's laughter rang out again, and for a fleeting moment, time felt suspended in a perfect snowy frame. Later, huddled together on the blanket, cocoa warming their hands, Sarah leaned her head on David's shoulder. "I used to dream about this," she murmured. "Just us, together, safe." David glanced down at her, his voice low and reverent. "I used to think I had everything, money, power, success, but this is the only thing that ever really mattered." She looked up at him, searching his face. "You've changed, David." "I had to," he said, voice thick. "They saved me. And you gave me a second chance when I didn't deserve one." Sarah shook her head gently. "You chose to stay. That's what matters." The sun began to dip below the skyline, casting long shadows over the snowy field. As the boys ran toward a snow-covered jungle gym, Sarah turned to David, a quiet seriousness in her eyes. "What now?" she asked. David reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Not flashy, not elaborate, just simple, honest. He opened it to reveal 2 rings, hers and a smaller one, delicately crafted, for Eli and Noah to carry. "Now," he said softly, "we rebuild. We heal. We do life as a family. Not because we have to, but because I want nothing more." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes, but she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it." The boys returned, cheeks flushed, arms outstretched. "We made a snowman!" they shouted. David grinned, slipping the box back into his pocket for later. "Then let's go meet him." As they walked back together, hands linked, hearts stitched tighter than ever before, the city lights blinked on around them, illuminating the path ahead. No longer broken, no longer afraid, just a family, finally whole.